Margaret Chen had interviewed 11 caregivers in 3 weeks. 11 strangers had sat across from her at the kitchen table, hands folded, reciting credentials, promising patience and competence and warmth. None of them had felt right. Her mother, Eleanor, was 83 years old, recovering from a fall that had fractured her hip, and increasingly confused in ways the doctors called expected and Margaret called terrifying. She needed someone in the house. She needed someone she could trust. The 12th candidate was named Dana Whitfield. She arrived on a gray Tuesday morning, exactly on time, wearing a plain cardigan and carrying a folder of references that looked, if anything, to complete. Margaret opened the front door and felt something she couldn't name. Not suspicion, not yet. Just a small cold current running under the surface of an otherwise ordinary moment. "You must be Margaret," Dana said, before introductions were made. "And Eleanor's resting in the room at the end of the hall. The one that used to be your father's study." Margaret froze in the doorway. She hadn't mentioned the layout of the house. She hadn't mentioned that the room had once been her father's study, a fact so specific, so deeply embedded in a family's private geography, that no resume, no reference check, no casual drive past the property could have surfaced it. "How did you know that?" Dana smiled, the kind of smile that seemed to apologize for its own competence. "Lucky guess. Older homes usually have a study near the back." It wasn't a lucky guess. Margaret would spend the next several weeks proving that to herself, one unbearable detail at a time. She let Dana in anyway. She told herself later that this was the strangeness of grief and exhaustion talking, that a woman running on 4 hours of sleep, a night for a month, will find omens in coincidences. She wanted to believe that. She needed the help too badly not to. Dana was, by every visible measure, extraordinary. She managed Eleanor's medications with military precision. She anticipated the older woman's moods before they surfaced, redirecting confusion with a gentleness Margaret herself had never mastered. Within 2 weeks, Eleanor was calmer than she had been in a year. Margaret began sleeping through the night for the first time since the fall. She should have felt only gratitude. Instead, she began keeping a private list. It started small. Dana knew Eleanor took her tea with exactly 1 sugar, unprompted, on the first afternoon. She knew which cabinet held the good china without being told. She referred, once, in passing, to the accident on the stairs last spring, except Eleanor's fall had happened in autumn, near the garage, and Margaret had never once described it that way to anyone outside the family. When Margaret gently corrected her, Dana blinked, apologized, and said she must have been thinking of another client. The explanation was smooth. It was also, Margaret was almost certain, a lie told by someone who had simply misjudged which detail. She was allowed to already know. Margaret began watching the security footage from the porch camera more closely than she ever had before. 3 weeks before Dana's interview, the same footage she had never bothered to review until now, showed a woman in a gray coat standing at the edge of the property for 11 minutes, not approaching the door, simply looking up at the house. The resolution was poor. The face was a smear of shadow, but the coat, the posture, the particular way the woman tilted her head toward the study window, Margaret recognized it. She was almost certain she recognized it. She said nothing to Dana. She started, instead, making calls. The agency that had placed Dana, Lakeside Home Care Solutions, confirmed her employment, her license, her clean background check. But when Margaret asked to speak to a previous client for a personal reference, something beyond the 2 professional letters in the folder, she was told, politely, that the client in question had moved out of state and was unreachable. The second reference, when Margaret finally tracked down the phone number independently, turned out to belong to a landline that had been disconnected for over a year. Margaret sat with that fact for a long time in the dark of her kitchen, the refrigerator humming behind her like something breathing. Someone had built Dana Whitfield a history. The history had holes in exactly the places a background check wouldn't think to look. She thought about firing her. She almost did, twice. But Eleanor had grown attached in a way that felt fragile and important. And firing a caregiver on the strength of a bad feeling and a blurry security clip felt, in the daylight, faintly insane. So Margaret did what people in her position often do. She decided to watch, and wait, and gather more before she acted. That decision cost her more than she understood at the time. Before we descend further into this mystery, if you seek the truths hidden in the shadows, subscribe to Hidden Ending Tales and turn on notifications. The deepest part of the rabbit hole is just ahead. It was Eleanor, in one of her clearer moments, who finally said the thing that changed everything. It was a Sunday evening. Margaret was folding laundry in the next room, and she heard her mother's voice drift through the wall, warm and conversational, addressing Dana as though picking up a long-running thread. "You look so much like her," Eleanor said. "Around the eyes. Your mother had the same eyes." Margaret stopped folding. Dana's reply came quickly, quietly, pitched low enough that it was clearly not meant to travel. "She did, didn't she?" Margaret walked into the room. Both women looked up, and something passed between them. Not guilt, exactly, but the particular stillness of 2 people caught mid-sentence in a conversation they had assumed was private. Eleanor smiled vaguely, already drifting back toward confusion. The moment already dissolving in her mind the way most moments now did. but Dana held Margaret's gaze for a beat too long before looking away. Margaret didn't sleep that night. She went back through old photographs, her parents' wedding album, boxers from the attic she hadn't opened in a decade, searching for a woman whose eyes might explain what she'd just overheard. She found nothing conclusive. What she found instead, tucked in the back of an old ledger belonging to her late father, was a name she didn't recognize, written beside a monthly figure that had been paid out, quietly, for 11 years, to an address in another state. The payments had stopped only when her father died. The ledger did not explain who the woman was. It only confirmed that someone had been paid to stay away, or paid to stay quiet. For longer than Margaret had been an adult, she confronted Dana the next morning. Ledger in hand, voice shaking in a way she hated, she asked her directly who she was, and why she had known the house before ever stepping inside it, and why Eleanor spoke to her like someone returning rather than someone new. Dana did not deny anything. She also did not explain. She said only that Margaret would understand everything in time, that timing mattered more than Margaret could know, and that she had never meant for it to happen this way, whatever this way was. Then she asked, with what looked like genuine sorrow, whether Margaret really wanted the answer, or whether she wanted her mother's last good months to remain undisturbed. Margaret told her to leave. Dana packed her single bag without argument and left within the hour. She did not take severance. She did not ask for a reference. At the door, she paused and said one more thing, quietly, almost kindly, that the study at the end of the hall had a loose floorboard beneath the window, and that Margaret's father had used it for years to keep the things he didn't want found by people who loved him. Margaret found the floorboard that night. Beneath it was a small collection of letters, undated, addressed to no one by name, written in her father's handwriting across more than a decade. They were not love letters, not exactly. They read more like a private ledger of guilt, references to a daughter he had supported but never met, an arrangement he had maintained in silence until the day he died, and a fear, repeated across the years in different words, that the truth would eventually walk back through his own front door. Margaret never found Dana again. The agency's number was disconnected within a week of the confrontation. The office address a rented mailbox that had been closed out entirely. Every reference, every credential, every carefully built fragment of Dana Whitfield's professional history evaporated as though it had never existed at all, because Margaret came to believe it hadn't. It had been built for exactly one purpose, to last exactly long enough to get through one front door, into one house. Long enough to sit across the table from an old woman and hear her say, unprompted, that the eyes looking back at her were familiar. Eleanor never fully understood what had happened. In her clearer moments afterward, she would occasionally ask when the nice woman was coming back, the one who understood her, the one who already knew the house so well. Margaret never had an answer that didn't require explaining a secret. She was still only half certain she'd correctly assembled. She kept the letters. She never located the woman they described. And on quiet evenings, when the house settled the way old houses do, she found herself wondering less about who Dana Whitfield really was, and more about a colder question underneath it. How long the woman had been waiting for the invitation to walk through that door, and whether, in the end, she had gotten everything she came for. If this story left you with more questions than answers, leave a comment with your theory. Subscribe for more tales that end where the light